Welcome, everyone, to our ongoing series of contemporary Cuban writers. This evening, we're honored to present author Joy Castro in an in-depth interview about her critically acclaimed new novel, One Brilliant Flame. The author will be interviewed by Isabel Alvarez Borland, Distinguished Professor Emerita of Arts and Humanities at the College of the Holy Cross. Her books include Cuban American Literature of Exile, From Person to Persona, and Discontinuidad y Ruptura en Guillermo Cabrera Infante. She is also co-editor of Negotiating Identities in Cuban American Art and Literature and Identity, Memory, and Diaspora. She has published numerous essays on Cuban and Latin American literature in scholarly journals such as Hispanic Review, MLN, and Revista Iberoamericana. Please join me in welcoming Isabel Alvarez Borland and Joy Castro.
Good evening. Welcome to our special event. Today we welcome author Joy Castro, who will discuss with us her latest novel titled One Brilliant Flame, published by Lake Union Press in 2023. It's an honor to be with Joy and with all of you today. Before we begin, I want to thank Iraida Iturralde, president of the Cuban Cultural Center, and Lourdes Blanco, chair of the literature program, for their interest in making this event come to fruition. I also want to thank author Joy Castro for her generous collaboration on the logistics that has made this conversation possible. In what follows, I will provide an introduction to Joy's works, a short one, and next, Joy will read a very short selection from One Brilliant Flame, followed by her own commentary that will help us place her reading in the context of the novel and will serve as a point of departure for our discussion. So a little bit of her background, not as long as she should have, because she's got a terrific bio. So Joy Castro is the author of the 2023 historical novel, One Brilliant Flame, set amidst the 19th century anti-colonial Cuban insurgent community in Key West. Her novel, Flight Risk, was a finalist for the 2022 International Thriller Award, and her essay collection, Island of Bones, received the International Latino Book Award. Joy has also authored the post-Katrina New Orleans literary thriller, Hell or High Water, which received the Nebraska Book Award. Joy Castro is the founding series editor of Machete, a series of innovative literary nonfiction at the Ohio State University Press. Her work has appeared in venues including the Afro-Hispanic Review, Los Angeles Review of Books, and the New York Times Magazine, among others. A former writer in residence at Vanderbilt University, she is currently the Willa Cather Professor of English and Ethnic Studies at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where she directs the Institute for Ethnic Studies. After her introduction, she will talk to us about the book itself, a very short summary of it, so that the people that haven't read it can get a sense of her reading later on. And then we will proceed. So Joy, I will let you talk about your book.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Isabel. And this is an honor. It's a beautiful introduction. And it's a thrill, actually, to get to be here talking with such a noted scholar of Cuban and Cuban American literature. It's a really big honor. And so thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
One Brilliant Flame is set in 1886 on the island of Key West. at the moment right before the Great Fire of Key West, which burned the city to the ground. And at that time, it was the most prosperous city in the entire state of Florida, primarily due to the cigar factory industry, which was huge. This was an industry that produced hundreds of millions of cigars a year and created incredible wealth. And Key West was a center of that production. It was one of the cities on the Tobacco Triangle: Havana, Key West, and Tampa. And so the novel is set there. At the time, arson was suspected for two reasons. One was a political reason, because Key West had functioned for several years by then as an offshore rebel base for the insurgent anti-colonial community in Cuba. They were working to expel Spanish imperialists. And Key West, only 90 miles away, was a wonderful place for them to gather munitions and gather funds to support the effort, the guerrilla fighting effort back in Cuba. And the other reason was a labor reason. The Cuban cigar workers were very lively. They went on strike a lot. They protested labor conditions. And so some people thought that maybe one of the factory owners had actually burned down Key West in order to move the operations up to Tampa, where law enforcement was very willing to put down strikes and so on by any means necessary. They knew that. So the novel is focused around 6 different main characters and a number of auxiliary characters, but 6 main characters, 3 young women, 3 young men, all of whom know each other, and all of whom have a motive to want Key West to burn. So it's kind of a whodunit thriller, but with a lot of serious research underpinning every aspect of the book. So I wanted to bring an audience to this incredible history that's underknown. And so I thought, how can I do it? I can try and make it as thrilling and romantic as possible. And so that's how the novel works. And all 6 of the characters are also narrators, so they get to each tell their own story in slices, so sort of a Faulknerian or Louise Erdrich kind of approach with multiple narrators. So you get to hear a little bit from each of them.
Well, that's a great summary. I think that will really orient the reader to your next piece, which is to read a very short, we agreed on, passage, but I love the passage and I have plenty of questions about it.
I'm so glad. Good,
Oh,
good, good.
I love it. I love it because it goes everywhere in the novel and I can catch the whole thing. So go for it. And this will be on pages for those of you that have the book. Was it 116 to 118, right?
Yeah,
More-
exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this chapter is narrated by Zenaida, and she's the daughter of the owner, a widow, of the most successful boarding house in Key West. And she's young, she's only 15. And so well, I won't tell you anything else about her, you'll figure it out. Okay. Oh, and I should say that galera is the gallery where the workers roll the cigars.
And Zenaida is really outside the window.
Yes, yes.
She's
Yeah.
listening to the lector read.
Yep.
Okay, and should we tell the people that are listening to us, that Zenaida is listening to the lector, and the lector's reading Anna Karenina.
No, that's in there.
Okay.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. Outside the tall windows of the galera, I stood with my mother and other women who were free from work in the afternoon and who arrived at the factory to gather in clusters, our parasols jostling, and listen to the latest installment of the Russian novel the new lector had brought. Ostensibly, I too was there to listen, to better myself, as my mother said, to get an education. But, as always, I stood where I could watch Chaveta. Nimble, swift, and slim, her fingers flickered as she twisted the tobacco into a tube, wrapped it, and slicked it down with resin. Her hands on the knife trimmed the ends with a certainty I envied, the way my mother chopped an onion or the head from a hen. utterly free of hesitation, sure of purpose, as if doubt were unknown to her, as if she never wondered what to do. The new lector's voice described the vacillations of Anna Karenina, who seemed far more comprehensible to me, driven by desires, acting, then drawing back, anguished, judging herself, trying a different path, stumbling. She felt more real than the people I knew in my own life, who never seemed to question what they did, all so committed, so passionate, so sure. Whether wresting Cuba from Spain's grasp, or marching in a strike, or making fistfuls of American dollars, they all seemed to know what and whom they wanted, while I watched and longed and wondered, unsure of what was right, unsure of what to do. And so I did nothing. I obeyed my mother, observed, listened, played it safe. Though Maceo had arrived on the steamer from Havana, he had not yet come to our boarding house, which was strange. Chaveta said he was staying a few nights with the Bozas first, and was said to be unwounded. He had come to rally troops, Chaveta said, to raise funds, to inform us of the progress in the field, and to wait for secret instructions from the Cubans in New York. He didn't yet know how those instructions would arrive, and he was seeking a way to smuggle them back to the guerrilla fighters, a way that could not be detected if the Spaniards captured him. Bent over her workbench, Chaveta blew a dark strand of hair from her face. Her cheeks were flushed with the heat of the calera. Outside, a breeze cooled us, and the shade of my pale yellow parasol shielded me from the sun, but still it was hot. And the full feeling from the good food at lunch made me drowsy. The handsome new lector read on, but my mind drifted from the story of Oblonsky and Levin and Anna and their lusts and woes, as Chaveta's hands twisted and spun the brown leaves into objects men would kiss to life and suck and burn. Her head bowed over her work, a quick smile flashing on her face from time to time when some line from the lector pleased her. Girl, a deep voice above and behind my shoulder. I turned. His eyes, his eyes were dark and steady, and he wore a soldier's garb, mended, clean, a rebel fighter's clothes, the color of forests. He smelled of leather, soap, and horses. Hot flutters beat my belly. Maceo, drink coffee with me. His voice stayed low, but still the other women glanced, cutting their eyes at each other. My mother's face was very still, but for a tiny twitching at the corner of her mouth. No, I said, I'm listening to this. You're listening to fiction. His dismissive smile was faint. I'll show you something real. My mother looked at me, her eyebrows arching so high they nearly hit her blue head wrap. Leave me alone, I said. I'm busy. I'll call on you this evening. I shrugged. Do what you like. His breath stroked the nape of my neck and my hairs quivered, electric. Always, he said.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hopefully, many people have the book with them and they have been with you. This passage that you have read lends itself to questions about your writing strategies. Let's talk about that a little bit before we get to the content of the book. I noticed, that all of the characters, all 6 of them, the main ones, the friends, speak in the first person. They speak for themselves. And I found that really interesting because the writers, the speakers, you could get to know them really well. And not only that, but you could get to know how they felt about the other ones. And that revealed parts of the other friends that you didn't really know existed. So can you tell us a little bit about your choice of point of view and why that for this novel?
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, so I love 19th century novels. But often they are told in the third person point of view, and often from a third person omniscient, so like a almost God's eye point of view, where someone can tell you about all of the different characters and their thoughts and feelings. And I wanted to do something that was set in history, but was really more contemporary in feel. And I think today we understand that our subjectivities are limited. Our positionalities limit what we see and how we think about the world. And so I have, characters from all different locations in society, characters from different racial locations, gender locations, sexuality, neurodiversity, and definitely class that plays a huge role. And the way our life circumstances shape us affect what we see and how we see and how we think about it. And of course, also our desires affect that. What we focus on is often driven by what we want or do not want. And certainly that's the case with these characters. So I wanted to show, for example, as with the character of Libano, the cafetero, um, today he would be probably diagnosed as autistic, we would call him. At the time, some of the characters just think of him as a fool because he's very quiet. And that they say that they make no bones about the fact that they see him that way. But once we get into his interiority, we find out it's so rich. He knows so much. He's voracious as a learner, and actually, is observing things in the situation that other people don't notice. So I wanted to play with that tension between inside and outside, and think through characters on a spectrum of race, class, gender, sexuality, and other issues. So that's why I did that, and I had so much fun because, like you say, like it's like a puzzle. Right.
Exactly. He gives
Yeah.
you round out the character by having him examined from several other points of view.
Right.
So it was very interesting. Well, we'll get to the characters later, but I also wanted to talk about what I would say in my studies costumbrismo, which is really your eye for detail. You talk about the bolita. Bolita. When I heard that word before years ago in my town, because I thought bolita was just something used in the campo in Zaguala Grande, where I'm from.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
bolita, it was a word for the lottery in Key West, which I found that interesting and funny.
Yeah, yeah.
You talk about the not the bolita, but also the pageants, the beauty pageants that existed there. You talk about and you do it in great detail, so that you go to the costumbres, the costumbres of the people. You feel like you've been in Key West in the 19th century. So can you tell us how you got this sense of the everyday in Key West of the 19th century, end of the 19th century?
Thank you so much. That's such a huge compliment. Um, a lot of research, and I was incredibly grateful. So I'd been curious all my life about my family's history and didn't know much about it. And in 2019, the National Endowment for the Humanities funded a summer research institute that was put together by two professors at the University of Tampa. Where of course Bolita was also a big deal back in the day. And so I went to this for a month, and every day we had lectures from experts, historians, and so on, who really focused on the late 19th century and Cuban tobacco towns in Florida. So super niche, right? Like very, very niche topic. And it was my dream come true to do all the reading. We read about, I remember counting, about 700 pages of history and all, politics and everything of the period. And then afterwards, when I decided I wanted to write this book, then I kept reading. And so at the back of the book, there are, I think, like 15 or 16 historians that I thank
You
by
mentioned.
name. Yeah, because I could not have done it without them. And then things like the workers' cabins, what those were like inside. I tried, making those that very detailed. Like That's from Ybor City, where you can still walk through a tobacco worker's cabin that's been preserved. And so sometimes I like had to watch YouTube videos over and over to understand how to roll the cigars, because I had been to a tobacco farm uh, in that same year in Cuba, west of Havana, and seen somebody, rolling the cigar, but my experience was very limited. So I had to be just crazy observant. And I know from having written the 3 novels before that, that the way to bring a reader in, and I learned this from Sandra Cisneros, among others, but the way to bring a reader into material that they might not necessarily be inherently interested in is to stick close to the body and incorporate all the senses as often as possible, sensory imagery. So how did things feel? What did things smell like? Not just what you can see or hear, which tend to be our go-to senses, but all of the senses. And so playing with that, like at every opportunity, helped me ground this abstract historical material in the sensual life of these characters. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Talking about history, you talk about the cafes, the role of the cafes then in the novel, where all of the politics got discussed.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was, again, that's not the way it was. How did you get there? And I felt I was there with them discussing and screaming. They're screaming at each other, and everybody has a different point of view, but everybody's against Spain and the whole idea of independence from Spain. They're talking there about it, but from different perspectives, classes and races all together.
Yes.
Was that well, was that the way you felt it was, or did you have family? Your father came from Cuba to Key West, right? Or your grandfather?
So no, this is a really great question. So all of that, all of that detail, it came from the books of history that I read. My
Okay.
family never talked about this. So my great grandfather, Juan Perez Rolo, came from Cuba, from Havana, in 1869. So a year after the famous Cry of Yara, right?
Mhm.
So at the beginning of the 10 Years' War, he came there, and his mother also, who had apparently just been widowed, and his siblings, they all came over on a steamer to Key West. Later, my grandfather, who
Okay.
had come from Galicia to Cuba, also as a 9-year-old boy, coincidentally, he ended up in first Tampa and then Key West, and he became a lector. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yes, at the Gato cigar factory. But I never knew any of this growing up. My cousins didn't know any of it. Nobody knew any of it. By the time I was born, my great-grandfather had been gone 30 years already. My grandfather was already 75 years old when I was born. So
Uh-huh.
by the time I got a bit older, like he was quite old and soon passed away. And there was no discussion of any of this. It
And
was
your
lost.
dad, your
Nope.
dad.
My father never talked about any of it, and I don't even know what he knew. He worked in the print shop that my grandfather founded on Elizabeth Street in Key West, and was dying to get out. He wanted a bigger life. And so as a teenager, he moved to Miami before 1959. So he was living in Miami as this very young man before the newer waves of exiles from Cuba came after Castro's revolution and communism. Yeah.
But there was a book by your great-grandfather, Recuerdos,
Yes.
that you read. It was that part of what got you writing this book.
Yes. Yes. So I should say, my own Spanish is terrible, really, really rocky.
We'll try you.
And Recuerdos is all in Spanish. It's never been translated.
Yeah.
But I raised my son to be fluent in Spanish and get a lot. So he translated the book roughly, like
Mhm.
just a working draft. And so I read that. And
And
then
what was in there? Because you don't talk about it. What are his recuerdos? From what? From
sure. From the time that he was a little 9-year-old boy, so the passage,
okay.
and then everything else is all about the growth of the Cuban community in Key West, the emigre enclave, the pistol duels that were fought,
Mhm.
the building of the mutual aid societies that really sustained the workers. There are some old photographs in that book. I mean, it just goes, it's the
Yeah.
history. And then
Okay.
the San Carlos Institute, which was really the hub of Cuban political and social life. And there are details, even like how people gave $1 to be part of this society. And there's this list of names, right? So it's a social history that he wrote in his old age, looking back. And I know that some scholars have, including Gerald Pollo, Jerry Pollo, a wonderful historian of Cuban Key West at that time period. He has used Mis Recuerdos as a primary source, but as far as I know, the only extant copy, other than the 2 copies that I have, is in the university library in Havana. And when I started to work on this, I remember I got an email from a professor at Harvard wanting to know about Mis Recuerdos. So what I hope is that that book will be also translated and into English and republished. I've been working for the last few years on a translation, not my translate, but with a translator on my grandfather's book of poetry, which he published in Key West in 1918, and that's going to come out this fall from University Press of Florida. So we're kind of like bringing that to life also.
So that plays into the costumbrismo, because it's what you describe is that, the life of Key West. And I wondered, did she live were you ever in Key West? A little bit, just a little bit, and then they moved to Miami, or you don't even remember?
No. So we would go multiple times a year.
Mhm.
The whole time I was growing up, my aunt and uncle still lived there. My grandparents lived on still in the house on Elizabeth Street. So we would go stay with my grandparents, play with my cousins. Like, okay, this is a good question. Yes, I spent tons of time as a child in Key
Mhm.
West until I think I visited my grandmother there when I was 17. Was the last time I went for many years. She passed away. My grandfather had passed away. My aunt and uncle moved away. And I didn't start going back again until I turned 50. My husband took me there as a gift. And that was before this book got written or even dreamed about. So
It
he
was
took
all in there all along. It
yeah,
just
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
come out.
So the
You had
details,
to-
like, yeah, what it feels like to swim in the ocean there, and
Uh-huh.
yeah, all of it. Yeah.
Well, so you have you have an interest in weaving in fiction and history, and uh, I wonder about the character of Maceo, because that just threw me off. First of all, you lead the reader to admire Maceo, but this is not the Maceo.
Mhm.
There's a part in your book where you said his mother named him Maceo after the great Maceo. So,
Yes.
but you only say it once
Yep.
in
Yep.
the book, and
Yep.
then everything else matches with the real Maceo. There's a lot of it.
Yeah.
He was,
Except for his age. Except for
oh yeah, he couldn't, they were
his age. He's too young.
yeah,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
were different
Yeah.
chronology, but yeah, he was a fighter, he was super valiant, he will not, I don't know, his character was very similar to the Maceo, but I'm thinking at the end, well, we shouldn't tell the readers what happens, but did you get pushback from those historians that are purists and go, why do you use the name Maceo to as a character in your book? Did you get that? Have you
I
got
love this question. Thank you so much. Thank you. So I haven't gotten pushback from historians, and a historian did vet the book, and I was grateful for that. Um, I wanted to explore the issue of heroism and how we look at heroism and construct it and deconstruct it. this is definitely not General Antonio Maceo, right? This is a young man, much younger and vulnerable in a number of ways. And he's trying to be a hero. And the circumstances of his life, the way he finds himself stuck politically between factions, and then also in his personal life, which, okay, we won't reveal it, but in
Yeah.
his personal life, things that were defined as non-heroic. He was trying to navigate those at a time when there was no language for it, no support for it, right? And trying to figure that out. So I wanted to take this larger than life image of a hero and have that be at play in the book. And of course, his mother who was enslaved and who never escaped slavery in the book, in the novel, she named him with all this hope, right? That he would
Mhm.
grow to be valorous and saving force. And so he bears that tremendous burden, and he does it with valor. At the same time, he's got these terrible undercurrents that he's battling.
Well, he's your most complicated and complex character. I mean, he leads me on and then drops me. But I mean, that the way that you do this with all of the characters, they all have secrets. It's a book of secrets in addition to everything else. That's what makes it so interesting. Your fiction, everyone in there turns out to be a little different than we thought at the end.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's where the fiction really triumphs for you. And then the history you bring in, the fire was true. The fire existed. The people had to leave. We don't know who put the boats out there in the harbor, whether it was Spain, but there were boats there to take everybody back to Cuba, right? Is that what it was?
A boat to take people back to Cuba, and there was also a boat to take people to Tampa, right? The workers, to get them up to Tampa and get them settled there, working in the industry up there. So like both of those boats made people wonder, okay, was it arson? Why did those boats get there so fast to,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
if it was arson, what was the motive? So were the boats coming as acts of mercy so fast because they, cared and wanted to help the people? Or was there an ulterior motive to having them there so fast? And this mystery and these secrets, they infuse the real life history. We just don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what you weave. That's your success. You weave that mystery of who set this fire.
Yeah.
And in your book, we can almost point at who set the fire, but that's you. That's your fiction.
Yeah.
So I found it of great interest.
I'm so happy.
And what I liked also is your thoughts on literature. You had literature itself, which makes you a modern writer. A little bit of metafiction in a sense. You're questioning the value of literature, how literature affects not just the workers as they hear Ana Karenina, but also literature as it affects Tenaida, who's your main voice there in the book, or at least, yes, she is the main voice. And she's affected, she's a poet, and she writes and she loves poetry, but that poetry is also social, because they hang up, they write these activist poems and hang them up at night. Chaveta hangs them, but she writes them, right? Who writes the poems? I thought
Yes.
the poems were written by Zenaida, but they could have been written by Chaveta.
Okay. I hope
Okay.
it's isn't too much of a
We'll
spoiler.
have to talk. We'll have to talk.
It's okay. Zenaida, she is writing the poems and she produces them on broadsides with her father's printing press. I'm kind of spoiling some stuff for maybe some readers, and then
They
Chaveta,
won't remember when they read it because
good, good. And Chaveta, who's action oriented and quite courageous and a hunter and a fighter and so on, she goes out at night and pastes the broadsides to buildings and so on. And this was the function of poetry. At that time, poetry had a public function. Poetry and revolution,
Mm.
they intimately connected, so powerful. I think in part because once you learn a poem, it's like learning a song. You can remember those words. You can transmit that
Mm.
quickly and easily. And if there's a fiery poem that makes people impassioned about something and gives an impulse voice, they can remember it, they can repeat it, they can teach it to other people, maybe people who are not necessarily literate, but can still certainly remember long poems. And poems were circulating in the Caribbean at this time, for sure. And they had
But
a
it wasn't an exclusive function. That's what I liked. I mean, you also talked about living life and having literature help you, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
As like Garcia Marquez used to say, la literatura es la forma de vivir, no?
yeah.
And in that sense, it's also Zenaida lives from her poetry. Her poetry, she likes to write. So there's the writer in. So literature enters in many ways. So that's, I don't know, politics, race. We haven't talked about race. You're very conscious of the fact that Sophia, the rich woman, befriends two Black girls and lets them come in and be friendly so that she can brag about her money or whatever. But I mean, these three girls were not friends of each. I mean, Chaveta and Zenaida were, but Sophia was just a tyrant. But she was also a go-getter, a business lady. So there is like the feminism of Sophia. You cannot dislike her 100%.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I never want to make a two-dimensional villain.
Mm-hmm.
I want the antagonist to be complicated and mm, there has to be something about them that you also connect with. Otherwise, you just dismiss them and like, okay, this is a cartoon. I didn't want her to be a cartoon. I wanted her to be smart and ambitious and have desires, but also to be pretty uncool, like a frenemy, we would say today,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
to her two friends. And I should say that Chaveta has a chapter where she talks about the fact that her parents have told her that she has indigenous Cuban background. So Taino and Arawak. And so that's also at play in the novel in terms of racial background and very, very carefully researched and very vetted and, went through several
You're
readers.
this, yes. Yeah, the three women really is a book. It's a book about women as well. Women in the 19th century getting out of that pattern where the husbands dominated them, because you can even Sophia's mother
Yeah.
rebels a little bit.
Indeed. Indeed.
So
Yeah. It's interesting that you say this because even though the main characters are young, I wanted the mothers to play serious roles, both in terms of domesticity and sexuality,
mm,
right? So Sophia's mother uh, has a lively situation, and so does Caridad, Zenaida's mother, who runs the boarding house.
yes, very liberal as Caridad.
Yes, yeah, and we find out that she even had an intellectual influence on her husband, the journalist, who was slain, and that's based on real pistol duels that happened in Key West. Those things really occurred, and Spaniard assassins came to the island to shut down the voices of people who were writing on behalf of Cuban independence. So that's a very reality-based scene when that character is killed. But we find out that, his wife, who's not literate, and who escaped enslavement, she's the one who would like give him cool ideas, political ideas. And so I loved being able
Right.
to play
Yeah.
with that. Women's intellectual power, political insights, their sexuality, and then poor old Chaveta's mother, really
It's a baby machine.
a baby machine for sure, for sure. And that was realistic too,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
So you have the racial issues, the the women issues, the political against Spain, the whole war. You mix it all in, and it all gels beautifully.
And so
So I don't know, do you have questions for me or for us or?
thank you. I'm honored to have that chance. Um, what did you think about the character in terms of gender, not just feminism, but also masculinities? I was really interested in probing masculinities, and we've talked a bit about Maceo. I talked a little bit about Libano and neurodiversity. What did you think of the lector, Feliciano, who's also a poet?
What did I think of him?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I really liked him.
Yeah.
He seemed, I mean, he had a good influence in as a lector, you know, to the workers. But he seemed to me he was taking advantage of people. He would come to dinner at the Sophia house, and then, but eventually he ended up with Sophia's mother, didn't he? Feliciano Galvan. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
he wasn't one of my favorite, and I didn't think much of him. I mean, didn't admire him, didn't dislike him. He didn't, I don't know, didn't have much impact. Why did you pick him to ask me about him?
Well, I was just curious because I do think he's such a mixed character, like Sophia is a mixed character. I wanted to give him some of the characteristics, the traits that would have been seen as great assets at the time. The lectores were like the rock stars of their era, and he sort of steps into that as a young, eligible bachelor who's good looking. He
Mhm.
shows up in town. He's like the stranger comes to town plot, right? And all the girls are excited, like in a Jane Austen novel. Ooh, who will get the bachelor? You know. And then, as you say, he's kind of a smooth operator in some ways, and he's got some sexism. He's also got some trauma. Uh,
Mhm.
and I wanted to explore how that trauma plays out. Like it's a very, again, a secret, as you say. It's a secret trauma. How does that affect his politics, his sexuality? Um, so
Joy, thank you so much for being with us today. It was great being able to talk to the author of a book that I totally loved.
thank you.
And we're going to conclude now, but as you know, we're going to also go now to a question and answer with the audience. And for the audience, as you're listening to me, please click on the bottom of your screen or the left side of your screen. You will find a link that will take you to the question and answer session. Also, if you cannot find it there in the advertising for this event, there is also a link for the question and answer. So thank you, everybody. This has been fantastic, Joy.
Thank you. Some thanks. Thank you, Isabel.